Well, happy Friday, everyone, and thank you for joining us with the UW Walworth County Master Gardeners. We had a bit of technical difficulties today, so we're back at it, and today's fabulous topic is gardening as we age. With us is Julie, Sue, and Bev, and our special guest at the bottom. And so please feel free to share images with the gardeners in our Facebook post. All through the week you can do that. Share pictures of your own garden, ask questions, and Julie and crew will get in there and answer your questions. So take it away.
Great, thanks Michelle, and sorry for those technical difficulties. We don't know why we can't live stream right now, so we are recording this and we will post it to Aram's Facebook page, and then I will post my email address too, so you can always directly email me questions if you have any. So once again, my name is Julie Hill. I'm a horticulture outreach specialist for Rock and Walworth counties. We have two lovely master gardeners here. They're certified master gardeners with UW Extension. We have Bev and Sue, and they're gonna help us present some material, our top 5 tips that we do every week. And normally we would answer your gardening questions live, but again, like Michelle said, you can still post those in the comments or reach out to us directly. So we'll just share my screen here. We'll go through some information. I want to thank Aram Library for hosting this lovely weekly program every Friday at noon. We're usually here Facebook Live, and you can watch past programs on Aram's website. So that's fantastic that on their Facebook page, all of our past videos have been recorded, and you can check out all the previous things that we've been doing throughout the summer. We're going to keep these programs going through September too. So as new gardening questions and concerns come up, feel free to let us know. So I'm with the University of Wisconsin Division of Extension. I'm a staff member. Again, I serve Walworth and Rock counties, and it's really my job and my mission to help connect all of you to our resources that the university can provide. We have tons of information to share, especially around horticulture and gardening. And when you work with Extension, when we can provide those resources, you know that you're getting credible and reliable information. That is one of the main ways that we can help serve you. Our master gardeners are a huge part of that. They do go through certification requirements. They do go through training. And they are really knowledgeable and experienced in what they do and know where to find information. So even we might not know all the answers, and that's okay. And there's always new things that come up and new things that learn, but we know where to find those answers. And that's a big part of what the Master Gardener program does and what I do as a horticulture outreach specialist, is knowing where to find good information, reliable information to help you become better gardeners in your own yards. So today we're going to be talking about some things that you can think about and do as you age. And really, I'll just say this, is that these tips that we're going to provide are really beneficial to all of us, and really good to think about as we're going out in the garden and doing yard work. So it's not just for older people, it's really things to think about for everybody. So Bev, I'll turn it over to you.
All right, thank you. Does anybody out there have a garden that actually looks like this? Look, there's no weeds. We've got trellises for our vegetables, and everything's divided up nice and neat. We got walkways and everything. I don't know about you, but my garden doesn't look like this, but it could if we did the right things. I want to talk briefly about Victory Gardens and Liberty Gardens, and now we have COVID Gardens. Those are gardens that the government encouraged people to start at World War I and World War II to help supplement the food that was being produced going to the soldiers, and being able to have families not die of starvation because they weren't having food. So they created those gardens. Go ahead, next, Julie. Okay, the top 5, gardening as we age. Access and adapt the following. We have to adapt the gardener, ourselves. We have to adapt our tools so they're easier to use. Our garden space so it's more manageable so we can navigate it. The plants that we choose, got to make sure they're right for what we can do and what your limitations are physically and space-wise. Go ahead, next. First, access and adapt the gardener. Using proper body mechanics, bending with our knees and not our back. Turning towards an object you're going to pick up rather than turning your body as you pick it up and then pulling it in front of you. Exercise and stretching. Do a workout or a warm-up before you start gardening. You know, your legs and your back and all that aren't used to doing all that extra exercise. So it's good, just like an athlete, to do a little bit of stretching so that we don't hurt anything as we're reaching for this, that, or the other thing. Be safe using your hands, backs, and legs. Wear proper clothing for protection. Shoes and boots. You want to have good footing under you. You don't want to be in bare feet and step on the sand or the soil and have your foot sink in 5 inches because you don't have a nice sole for it to fit on. Gloves. Make sure they're comfortable and they fit properly. Make sure that when you're wearing them, you feel like you can use them. If you don't like the gloves you've got, try new ones. Hat, very important so you don't get sunburn. And it soaks up the sweat when you're sweating out there. So it produces a little bit of shade for you. Wear light colored clothing because it reflects the heat rather than absorbing it like dark colored clothing. The other thing I might say is wear long sleeves. I know at 90 degrees out, you don't necessarily want to be wearing long sleeves because it's hot, but at the same time, a lot of those plants that we rub up against, they have thistles, they have little hairs on the leaves, and some people can get reactions from those. So if you've got a light fabric long sleeve shirt, that's good to wear as also. Important, stay hydrated, drink water. You know, you can get heat stroke from not drinking enough water, and who wants to have heat stroke when you're trying to enjoy the outdoors? Go ahead, Julie. Assess and adapt your tools. Foam tubing on the handles of your tools protects your hands from things like slivers, some blisters. It's easier to grip. You get a bigger grip for your hands so you don't have to grip it so tight. I use it on my hand tools as well as rakes, shovels, and those things. Correct length of handles. Make sure the tool fits you. Just because it's made for a 7-foot tall person doesn't mean that me at 5'2" can use that tool. I don't have the right leverages. I don't have the correct placement of my hands to do the job I need. So try and get tools that are the right length for you. At the same time, make sure you get the proper weight of the tools. If I've got a cutter and it's too heavy in my hand, just because it's a good cutter doesn't make it a good fit for me. I need to make sure that I can properly use those tools and they're not too heavy for me. Using buckets, wagons, and trolleys to carry your tools from wherever you store them to wherever you're going to garden saves you trips, so you don't have to keep running back and forth to get your tools. And if you use a trolley or something with wheels on it, then you can roll it where you're going and you don't have to lift and carry. Last tip, add bright colored ribbons or tape to your tool handles so you can find the tool if and when you set it down. You don't want to trip over it or bury it in the soil, depending on what you're doing. Go ahead, next. Assess and adapt your garden space. The ground is far away, especially if you have difficulty bending down to it or getting up off of it. Me, I go down real easy. It's coming back up is a bit difficult. So consider elevating your plants. Put them in raised beds. Use containers. Or use a stool or a bench. You can get garden benches on wheels now. So you just sit down and you just wheel yourself along through the garden rows. Maybe if you plant less, then you don't have to be down there so much. And like I said, invest in kneeling pads or benches. Really important, keep your tools near you where you are working, where you can see them. That way you don't have to run back and forth every time you need a new tool. Go ahead. Assess and adapt your plants. Choose plants that require less work for you. Example would be tomatoes and beans. Tomato plants, there are two types. Determinate, which means they're kind of bushy. They don't grow forever and ever and ever. They kind of contain themselves. So they just need a little bit of staking and then they produce just fine. The other ones, indeterminates, are more, they require more attention. They need more space to grow, become jungle quickly and difficult to maneuver around because you've got this huge plant. Using trellises to keep your vine crops contained and produce upright growth, so you can pick your cucumbers at eye level instead of at ankle level. So it makes it easier for you to pick. Try container or raised bed gardening. I just want to add here, when we talk about adapting your plants, if your garden space is way out in the North 40 and you have trouble walking, maybe you don't want to have to truck out there every time you want to do something with your garden. I have that issue. I can't walk that far, so I made a raised or a container garden, patio garden outside my garage. And so it's easy for me to access and it's easy to get to, and it just works better for me. Go ahead. Assess and adapt to your limitations. Honestly, look at your needs and wants about your garden space. Do you need to walk 40 miles to the north field to get your crops? What are your favorite plants that you just can't do without? You know, and think about moving them closer to where you are. Do you have a good space where you could garden closer to where to your house and make it more accessible to you? Know what you're doing and capable of doing. Can you handle 30 tomato plants? If you can't, maybe you only want to put 10 in, because as we get older, we just can't do as much as we did before. Make choices based on what you can do safely. If you can't, wow, just lost that example. Do things on what you can do safely. If you can't be on the ground doing stuff, then you want to raise your plants or raise your beds or raise yourself. If you raise yourself, you're going to want to try and raise those plants up so that you're still not bending way over if that's a problem for you. And then make plans for the new way of gardening you can follow. So, you know, think about what you do now, your mechanics, your plants, and make the changes that you can, and then follow that gardening plan. And one last thing, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, and it's a whole lot cheaper. Benjamin Franklin. Thank you.
Thank you, Bev. Such great tips, and really for any age. I know one big thing I learned this past year was mixing up my tasks. So I used to spend hours and hours and hours just weeding, because you get really focused on weeding that area and it starts looking really good and you're cleaning it up, and then you keep moving, and then I wouldn't be able to keep going. My shoulders and back and everything would be so sore from being in that same position for so long. So it's okay to get up and move around and go do a different task, and just keep, be really aware of your body, and it is exercise, and we have to take care of ourselves, because otherwise if you get too sore, gardening's not going to be enjoyable, and we want to keep it enjoyable and keep you doing it throughout the whole season. So as we're going to switch gears a little bit, we're harvesting tomatoes right now. I'm sure everybody is. Speaking of planting too many tomato plants, I am totally guilty of that this year. Planted way too much, and trying to figure out what to do with them all. So as you're harvesting, you might be seeing some of these common problems. By no means is this a total list of everything that could be wrong, but these are some common things that I get asked about during our growing season and during kind of this harvest time, especially about tomatoes, because this is a very common thing that a lot of home gardeners grow. So one thing that you might see, it's not a disease, it's called blossom end rot, and you can kind of see in that picture just right where the blossom was, it looks like this little rotted out portion of the tomato. And what causes this is a problem with getting the calcium that's from the soil into the plant. So usually it's not caused by a disease, but it's usually caused by watering issues, so maybe uneven soil moisture. So if you don't supplement your garden with watering when we don't get a lot of rainfall and allow it to get dry, it could be causing some of this. Also, another cause could be some cool temperatures while the tomatoes are producing. So I've heard of people trying to add things to the soil, like more calcium or Alka-Seltzer things, and that's not really the problem. It's really an issue of the plant being able to get the calcium out of the soil, and how it does that is through the water and through the roots. So maintaining that soil moisture is really helpful, not only by watering, but also by using mulch around plants too can help a lot. So that's one thing that you might see that, again, is not a disease problem, but can be managed with some cultural modifications. Another thing that you might see that I hear a lot about is called cat facing. Again, it's not a disease, just kind of makes your tomatoes look funny. The tomatoes are still totally edible. You just usually have to cut around kind of those scarred parts. This is really common on heirloom varieties too. And a couple different reasons why it might happen. It could happen when the tomatoes are flowering and we have some cooler temperatures. It can also be caused by uneven soil moisture or too much nitrogen. So being aware of if you're fertilizing, how much you're fertilizing, how much nitrogen you're using. Again, not a disease problem. Tomatoes are still usable. They just kind of look a little deformed, and usually you kind of have to cut around those areas that are deformed like that. A couple other common cultural problems, again, not disease related. One is cracking. I know I see this on my cherry tomatoes when I go pick them sometimes, mostly caused by the uneven watering issue again, and there are some varieties that are more susceptible. Another thing that you might see is what's called as green shoulders, where kind of the rest of the tomato looks ripe, but the top of it just looks like it never ripens, and it has these green shoulders. It has that green coloring. This again is more common on heirloom varieties, but it can be caused by high temperatures and direct sun. So if you're in the habit of kind of pruning out leaves or little branches on your tomatoes, make sure to leave some coverage. You want to leave some of that foliage, some of those leaves to help kind of protect those tomatoes as they're ripening. Another thing that happens is called sun scald, and that's the same type of thing where too high of temperatures and sun exposure causes some white patches, and it looks like the tomatoes have gotten sunburned. They have kind of this white or bleached area on the tomato. So keeping some foliage to help kind of protect them, giving a little shade within the tomato plant to help them not have such direct exposure to the sun. So there are a couple disease problems. These are really common. A lot of gardeners see these. And it's just going to tend to happen on a regular basis, but there are some things you can do to be a little bit more preventative. So the first one is early blight, and you're probably seeing this on your tomato plants or maybe on your neighbor's tomato plants. The leaves start looking kind of spotted and yellow. A lot of times you see it on the lower branches and then going up the tomato plant. And what causes this is a disease. It's a fungus that just lives in our soil, and it overwinters. It survives our Wisconsin winters on plant debris, and it can survive in the soil for a couple of years. So what can you do? Well, there are resistant varieties. So when you're getting ready to plant, you can look for those resistant varieties to early blight. Another big thing is making sure you don't plant tomatoes in the same spot every year, and don't plant other similar plants like from the nightshade family. So you want to rotate your plants around your garden space. You don't want to keep planting the same things in the same spot year after year. And this goes for all your crops. Rotate them around the garden. Mulch is really helpful, and this is the first year that I've used straw mulch, and it's helped a lot with my plants. It's helped maintain the soil moisture, but it also helps to maintain what we call soil splash. So when the rain or the water hits the soil, it's going to splash back onto the plant, and that splashes those fungal spores right onto the plant, and then the plant gets sick. So mulching kind of helps control that. Avoiding overhead watering. I know we've mentioned that before in this program. We really want to water at the base of the plants at the soil level. Encouraging good air circulation. So making sure when you plant plants, and I'm guilty of this too, is that I plant them too close together. So remembering that they're going to get bigger and they need to have that air moving between them. And then in the fall, make sure to get all that plant debris out of the garden, because those fungal spores, that fungus, can live on that plant debris over the winter. Another really common and very similar problem is called septoria leaf spot. Very similar to early blight. It's kind of hard to tell the difference. And preventative measures are really going to be the same. So you're going to see this on the leaves and stems and not on the actual tomatoes. You're going to see some spots again with some dark borders, circular spots. You might see some black dots in the center. Again, it usually starts on the lower leaves and moves up. And when we have those warm and humid and wet spells, these fungal infections just thrive in those conditions. Again, this is a fungus that lives in the soil, so it gets splashed up from the soil, and it can survive our winters, and it gets splashed up onto the plant when we're watering or during rainfall events. So again, you can look for resistant varieties, rotate those crops. I can't stress that enough. Using mulch in the garden is a great help. Avoid overhead watering. So again, overhead sprinkler systems and, you know, showering the plant is not good. We want to water right at the base, and that air circulation, and again, getting those plants cleaned up after you're all done with them. Another problem that we might not be seeing, I know some areas of the state do have this a little bit more, is called late blight. And we see this also on potatoes and tomatoes because, again, they're in the same nightshade family. This one's going to look a little different. It's going to look like these more gray areas on your stems and leaves. And the fruits can be affected. The actual tomato will show some kind of leathery brown areas. And this really causes rapid decline in the plants. It will cause the death of the plants. Again, it's a fungal infection, but the spores are carried in the wind, or they come with transplants. And it does overwinter, but only on live plant material. So again, it's just something that's kind of around in the environment. If you do have this on your plants or you end up getting it, make sure to bag those plants up and get rid of them. Don't put them in the compost because those fungal spores are still around then and can get carried in the wind and affect other plants. Again, good practices of keeping the foliage dry and with good watering practices and good air circulation. You can also find late blight resistant varieties. And one more tomato tip. So I mentioned that I planted way too many tomatoes and we are inundated with tomatoes. So this year, our master gardener on the line here, Sue, and a couple of others had mentioned that you can freeze tomatoes. And I thought, no way could I freeze tomatoes and that they would be good to use. But I make a lot of chili and tomato sauce and stews, especially in the fall and winter time. And so I'm going to try freezing my tomatoes this year. So choose some of those ripe, firm tomatoes, and you can stick them in a Ziploc. You can choose if you want to core them or not core them. It's really easy. I just stuck some in the freezer last night, so I'm going to see how they turn out. And when you're ready to use them, you can just pull them out and run them under hot water to take the skins off and stick them in your favorite chili recipe or stew or whatever you're making. So I just wanted to share that with you if you're looking for what to do with your excess tomatoes. Another idea is there are food pantries that accept fresh produce. So just give them a call ahead and make sure that if you are trying to donate to a food pantry, make sure they have the storage. So a lot of times they're just limited by space. But a lot of our local food pantries in the county and all over the state do accept fresh produce. So I encourage you to check out those opportunities too. I will share lots of resources with Aram Library to post with this video, as well as my email address. So if anybody ever has questions, if a gardening question comes up while you're working out in the yard this weekend, feel free to email me. You can email me pictures of what you're seeing, and we are happy to answer those questions. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Michelle.
Can you imagine all the knowledge in these people's heads? I mean, really. It's amazing, and we are so lucky to have them every Friday at our fingertips in Facebook. So thank you, everyone, for joining us again. Thank you, Master Gardeners, for giving us your valuable time. And everyone out in library land, don't forget that you can ask questions all through the week. Julie jumps on our Facebook, and she's keeping track and looking for questions that you might have. And then once again, thank you everyone for joining us, and we're going to sign off. Have a lovely weekend.
Thank you.